think DMT, well, can make a claim to being the world's strangest drug, the world's most bizarre and difficult to explain drug. It slots into your neural machinery with almost like engineered precision and switches your reality channel. So one moment you're enjoying this normal waking world, which is perfectly familiar and stable, and you know exactly what you're looking at. And then the next moment, a few seconds later, the world is gone and it's been replaced. And it's not just been replaced by some magical dream world, but it's been replaced by this inordinately complex, hyper-technological alien environment that's filled with intelligent, supremely intelligent and communicative beings that are neither human nor animal. That's the key question, I think, is can the brain do this without having access to some alternate source of sensory inputs?
Why is DMT the strangest drug on Earth? Why do we keep seeing the same entities on DMT? And are these entities real? And if so, who are they? And what if DMT isn't just a drug, but an alien technology used to communicate with non-human beings? And trust me, I get it. It sounds insane. But there may be a surprisingly strong case for it. Today's guest on the Your Mate Tom podcast is Andrew Gallimore, pharmacologist, neurobiologist, and author of books such as Alien Information Theory, Reality Switch Technologies, and his brand new book, Death by Astonishment, Confronting the Mystery of the World's Strangest Drug. Here to unpack the science, history, and philosophy behind the strangeness of DMT. So strap yourselves in, this one gets weird, but awesome. Like, share, and subscribe, and all that good stuff. What made you move to Japan anyway?
Originally for work, for a research position in Okinawa. That was 10 years ago. And it's kind of become my home, so
Nice.
I'm not going to leave.
How's Japanese culture with psychedelics and like when you have to talk to people about what you do?
That's a good question. Actually, I mean, most people think they're led to assume that if you mention psychedelics to a Japanese person, they're going to go, oh, yabai, yabai. They're going to kind of run away screaming and go to the police station or something. But most people, I would say almost all Japanese people I've spoken to about psychedelics, have been fascinated, very interested, want to learn more. And I know quite a few people. I have some friends, Japanese friends, who are very interested in psychedelics. They're studying psilocybin at Keio University in Tokyo. There's
Really?
yeah, there's quite a significant subculture surrounding psychedelics. There are ayahuasca circles scattered around Japan. Location, I'm not sure exactly, but that they exist, and they rent out village halls, and it's not it's not like people imagine. I mean, when people think about Japan and drugs, they're really what they mean is Japan and cannabis and methamphetamine, stimulants.
Yes, because I heard that there's a higher stigma. Would you say it's true that there's a heavier stigma towards cannabis than there is like mushrooms or DMT or something?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't really understand it. One of my friends says, oh, it's because cannabis makes you lazy.
Yeah.
So
that's where my mind went immediately. So yeah, it makes sense.
and meth. I mean, meth goes back to after the end of the Second World War, when millions of people in Japan became addicted to meth, and it was seen as an existential threat. I mean, the country was already kind of beaten down at that point, obviously, having just lost this massive war, and then lots of people started taking meth, and they thought this is an existential threat. And I think that feeling is still kind of echoes down the generations. So yeah, that's what people are talking about in Japan is cannabis and meth. If you're talking about those, then they are taboo. But
interesting.
Everything else,
I wonder if in the beginning when they took meth, they were like, "Oh, this is amazing! Look, we're getting like twice as much work done."
Exactly. Oh yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, the history of meth. I mean, meth was invented in Japan by a Japanese chemist.
Is that right?
Yeah, in
I had no
1889.
Wow.
Yeah, and people were using it. It was used, they would go out drinking, and then just kind of as they started flagging, they would inject. Injection was their way of doing it.
So
yeah,
the OG Heisenberg.
Exactly. Yeah.
Heisenberger. Yes.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I've actually just been listening to your audiobook, which has been very interesting. I'm halfway through. Uh,
Wonderful.
but yeah, man, I'd love to dive into it. I guess we could start off by, I'd love to ask you, like, why do you call DMT the world's strangest drug? You know, because there are a lot of psychedelics out there, but why DMT? Why is this your primary focus?
Well, I mean, the, the short answer is, I mean, there are a number of drugs that could vie for that position of the world's strangest, but arguably the world's strangest drug wouldn't have made a very good subtitle for the book, so I went with the world's strangest drug, you know. So that's the kind of the short and honest
Yeah.
answer. But no, I think DMT, well, it does, it does certainly can make a claim to being the world's strangest drug, the world's most bizarre and difficult to explain drug,
Mm,
in that it's this kind of it slots into your neural machinery with almost like engineered precision and switches your reality channel. So one moment you're enjoying this normal waking world, which is perfectly familiar and stable, and you know exactly what you're looking at. And then the next moment, a few seconds later, the world is gone and it's been replaced. And it's not
mm,
just been replaced by some magical dream world, but it's been replaced by this inordinately complex, hyper technological alien environment that's filled with intelligent, supremely intelligent and communicative beings that are neither human nor animal. That's, in my opinion, very difficult to explain. It's not easy to just say that this is, hallucination or your brain's kind of making it up.
mm.
And basically, the last 20 years of my life, after my first DMT experience, has been devoted to trying to get to the bottom, if that's possible, of what DMT represents.
Yeah, man, I'd relate with that because having just one trip, it really can radically shift your perspective. Where you start
Yes.
like, oh, I gotta like re. I thought I kind of knew about what reality was, but now it's like back to the drawing board. And
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
that's it. I mean, it completely obliterates any preconceptions or assumptions or pretensions, really, that humans have. We think we've got it all worked out and that people like Lawrence Krauss and the Brian Greene will stand up on stage in their TED talk and tell us that, all about how we've got it all worked out. We understand where the universe came from and where it's ultimately ending up and
right.
how it relates to, and actually give them, you know, give me 5 minutes with Lawrence Krauss.
It
That
sounds
sounded
so wrong
awful.
out of context. Give me 5 minutes alone with that guy. I'll change his perspective. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, huh? Like it's funny because I feel like in every era in civilization we always get to the point where like, okay, now we figured it out. Even though all throughout history we've been proven wrong again and again and again. No, but this time, now we know.
This time, this is it. We've got
For
it
real, for
worked out
real.
now.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is it. Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, we just have. I feel like there's still so much to learn, and I feel like with psychedelics in general, it feels like the more you do it, or the more you explore these realms, the more you understand how much you don't actually know. It's like that expanding the circle, the circumference of the unknown.
Yeah, I mean, DMT particularly, forces you into a direct confrontation, a collision, really, with
Mm,
the impossible. I mean, what you experience under the influence of DMT, it's not just strange or unusual or uncanny or anything like this. I mean, it is impossible. You see things that cannot exist. Not only don't exist, but literally cannot exist in this reality. Five, six, seven, eight, nine-dimensional Fabergé eggs being vomited out by little machinic elfin creatures and just things that could not happen. And when you're confronted with that, and say, here it is. You don't have to believe. You don't have to believe in what's written in, promulgated in leather-bound books or anything like that. It's like, here it is. It's right there. You are face to face with it, and it's undeniable, irresistible in its construction. It's like, damn, what do I do with this?
yeah, like there's so many different paths we can take in this interview,
Hmm.
but like, how do you take it? if you can, like, because you're saying like you go through this impossible experience, and you're like, dude, what the hell do I do with this? How do you like even approach that in a scientific
First,
context, particularly?
firstly, with a great deal of humility,
Mm,
which is probably the most difficult thing for humans to accept, is that we don't
yeah,
know shit,
yeah,
to put it kind of bluntly. Um, but then, yes, I mean that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years is trying to take it back to basics. You can get say, okay, maybe this is the spirit world, or this is the astral plane. This is the collective unconscious that Jung was talking about. You can jump to any one particular metaphysical model and
yes.
accept it. And that's what most people do. Or they say, oh, it's just hallucination. So what I try to do is to work from the ground up. And as a neuroscientist, that's my thing. So I start from, what do we know about the normal waking world, first of all? Well, we know that normal waking world is it's this model of the environment that's constructed by your brain, that's constantly being tested against sensory inputs. The world you experience is always this model. You never have direct access to the environment in itself,
Mm,
but you have access to this model that's being constructed by your brain. And that applies to all experiences. So when you're dreaming, a dream is like a selective simulation of the waking world, but whilst disconnected from sensory inputs. But so that suggests then that, well, if you take a psychedelic drug, it's that model that's being manipulated, it's being perturbed. And neuroimaging now shows that, yes, when a psychedelic molecule enters the brain, it excites certain populations of neurons, and it kind of loosens up that world model. So the world it kind of shifts from being very stable and fixed and predictable to being much more fluid and dynamic and novel. And this kind of maps
mm,
to what you see in the neuroimaging machine. So that kind of makes sense. But then with DMT, it seems to kind of transcend this, and the world model is not just altered or loosened up or made more fluid, but is actually replaced in its entirety. So what's happening is somehow the brain it stops constructing the normal waking world and starts constructing this extremely bizarre alien world that has no relationship to the normal waking world. So it's like the model has been changed.
mm,
Um, and the question for me is, how is that possible? Because we know that your brain wasn't kind of dropped to earth, um, being able to construct this beautiful model of the environment that we live within. But actually, it's something that your brain learns to do. It's something our brain has evolved to do. It's the only world model, really, that our brain knows how to build, which is the model of the environment. It's the only language, if you like, that the brain knows how to speak, is constructing a subjective world model that functions as a model of the environment. So how then, when you manipulate the brain with DMT, does the brain suddenly become capable of, with great crisp efficiency and great virtuosity and flawlessly, it starts to construct these entirely alien alternate worlds that bear no relation. Sorry, I'm getting too excited here.
no, no, you're
That bear
right.
no relationship whatsoever to the
Yeah.
to the the other model, and that's the key question, I think, is can the brain do this without having access to some alternate source of sensory inputs?
Mm,
The normal waking world is always being tested against and tuned to information from the environment. We kind of understand how that works. That's why the world you experience is so stable and predictable, is because your brain is constantly sampling sensory inputs through the eyes, etc., to kind of anchor that model. But with DMT, it's like, oh, um, is there some other source of sensory inputs? Is the brain gaining access somehow to other sensory information that allows it to construct these highly alien alternate model?
yeah, so strange, man. Like, what are the implications of this?
Well, it depends upon the conclusions that you draw. I mean, in my latest book, I mean, I reach the conclusion very carefully and hopefully with as much skepticism and as rationally and clearly and thoroughly as possible that I believe that DMT does indeed allow us to interface with some kind of intelligent agent. I'll go as far as that. I won't call it an alien. I won't call it a god or a demon or a jinn or whatever.
Mm.
Some kind of intelligent agent that is directing information into the brain. That's my working model of what's going on. Um, so when you smoke DMT or you inject DMT, the brain enters this highly susceptible state. It's much more fluid. It's much more susceptible to being commandeered or seized control of by this intelligence, which basically takes control of your brain's world building apparatus and uses it to construct its world. You don't break through into the DMT world, the DMT world breaks through into you, I always say.
Yeah.
Um, so if that's correct, then well, what are the implications of realizing that not only are we not alone, but that there are intelligences that are kind of beyond your ability to imagine, beyond your comprehension in terms of the level of their intelligence that they possess, and that they're accessible. They're right here. They're right
Yeah.
now. Anyone can interface with these intelligences that are way beyond the human. That's transcendentally transformative. I mean, that's a massive paradigm shift. It completely
Oh, yeah.
alters our position in reality, in broader reality, and where we thought we sat kind of at the top of the tree, at least, on Earth, and maybe separated by great, vast intergalactic distances from any other kind of intelligence. And yet, here we are. Actually, no, we're actually occupying, we're actually very, very low down. Probably we
Like,
don't even register on the scale of
right.
intelligence. Um,
Meatworms.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's very humbling experience, isn't it? Because I feel like, especially through the religious age, we went through thousands of years thinking that we're the top dog, we're the alpha. And then when you have an experience like this, where you realize that, oh shit, I might be way lower on this cosmic scale than I thought. And yeah, it can be damaging for the ego. And it does,
Oh,
like
for
you said, the
sure. Yeah.
implications is if any of this is even slightly true, it changes everything, you know?
Changes absolutely everything. Yeah.
Yeah,
From the ground of reality upwards.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Would you say that these entities, or whatever you want to call them, would you say that these are the same things that Carl Jung talked about when he talked about like archetypes from the collective unconscious, or would you say this is a more distinct thing that transcends even that model?
You see, once you get into the young thing, the
Mm-hmm.
problem is that there are a number of ways to approach Young. You can approach it as I do from a neurobiological standpoint. Now, Young was operating before, long before the kind of the huge developments in neuroscience that we have now. We understand a lot more about, what the brain does and how the brain works. And
Okay.
Jung's idea of archetypes, which are these recurring patterns generated by the brain in the simplest way of looking at it. And of course, people think about archetypes and they think about the mother and the trickster and all that kind of stuff. But really, these are just, in my opinion, the archetypes they're like instincts. They are so in the same way that let's take, for instance, a spider,
Okay.
right? A spider will, without being taught, it kind of knows how to construct a web.
Mm-hmm.
It's instinctive. These are sort of inherited patterns of neural connectivity that allow it to perform these behaviors without learning how to do so. Um, in the same way, if you take a baby rat and place it into a cage, and you put some cat hairs into the cage, even if the rat has never been exposed to a cat, it will
Yes.
it will freeze. It will be very cautious
Okay.
because it's scared, but it doesn't know why it's scared,
Kind of like
basically.
pre-installed software.
Yeah.
It's pre-installed software, yeah, and that's one way of thinking about it, right? And so humans, of course, we're born with pre-installed software. So how do we respond to our mother, for example, is kind of it's pre-installed. It's something that we don't have to learn to want to be close to our mother and to see our mother quite differently to how we see a stranger. You know, a stranger
Mm,
instinctively,
mm.
babies will be wary of. Weary? That's a different word.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
wary. Anyway,
Same, same.
so we have all of these pre-installed programs, if you like, as you put it, or software for
Yeah.
dealing with, responding to different types of humans. You know, humans can be placed into broad social categories. Mother, obviously, father, wise old man. This is someone who is a senior member of the social group who you should listen carefully to because they have lots of life experience and wisdom, that kind of thing. So we have all of these pre-installed broad brushstroke ways of responding to humans in the environment and animals as well. You know, babies will be a little bit
Yes.
wary if you place a snake in the room, or a spider. Again, even if they've never been exposed to a snake or a spider. So archetypes are really just those pre-packaged, pre-installed, inherited ways of responding to certain types of humans and animals, and ultimately they can give the brain the propensity to generate images of these types of humans, but they're very personal. So you know, if my mother archetype was activated, I might see an image of my mother, not your mother or anyone
Mm.
else's mother, but my mother. But it's just these prepackaged ways of responding to um, different types of humans in the environment. Basically, that's what an archetype is.
Yeah.
So in that sense, you know, in the collective unconscious, to extend that is simply the set of all of these archetypes that we carry. But they're not images. You know, even Jung said, you know, archetypes, it's not imagery. So the archetypes can't really help us, in my opinion, when we think about archetypes from this neurobiological perspective. The archetypes can't explain these hyper-technological cityscapes filled with non-human, non-animal beings. The DMT experience is
Mm.
quintessentially non-human, whereas the archetypes are very much human. I mean, it's the most human, one of the most kind of human components of us is
Yeah. Like
are these set of
recognizable
archetypes.
patterns. Like, like even though I've never seen like a demon in real life, if I see one in the spirit world, my brain's going to be like, ah, okay, that's this. Like this.
That's
There's a reference
this,
point.
right?
Whereas DMT is like, I, I have no like no reference. You
Exactly,
can't
you
get no
know,
words
and
out. Yeah, it's interesting.
exactly. And so I think, you know, even like Aldous Huxley, of course, he wrote The Doors of Perception, the most
Yes,
famous, the
classic.
mescaline trip report. But he also wrote Heaven and Hell afterwards, and he spoke about what he called the antipodes of the mind, and he realized that when you take psychedelic drugs in high doses, you seem to go past the archetypal patterns, the collective unconscious, and you seem to reach this other place where these strange creatures reside that had nothing to do with humanity or its history, that would
Hmm.
seem to occupy this space. You know, he was writing. I don't know when was that published? 1960, something like this. I forget, but you're talking more than half a century ago, at
Yes,
least,
exactly.
when he wrote Heaven and Hell. And he
Yeah.
was kind of, again, he didn't understand the neuroscience, but he was preempting, kind of, he understood that Jung wasn't going to be the answer here. And I happen to agree with him.
Hmm. Interesting. So you say that because Jung didn't understand modern neurobiology, are you implying that some of the discoveries we've made kind of, uh, I guess, disprove some of his theories or something like that?
Well, I think that because he wasn't anchored to the neurobiology, which meant that he could embellish and he could stray into the mystical. And a lot of
Right.
Jung's work is clearly it's mystical stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
so there are people who will say have a quite different opinion, or view of what the collective unconscious and what the archetypes are. They will say, "Oh, actually, no, it is this transcendental space that's filled with these beings." And once you do that, in my opinion, then you might just might as well just call it the spirit world or the astral plane or the afterlife or whatever, because you're in metaphysical territory, and I can't do anything with that.
Yeah.
I can't disprove it. I can't test it. It's just it's a mystical worldview. So I always
Mm.
approach Jung. I mean, a lot of what Jung said has been borne out by neurobiology and makes sense. The archetypes, we can explain them. They kind of fall out of the evolution of the human brain, is something we expect, which is remarkable
Yes.
considering that he was working way before we understood these things. So a lot of what Jung says can be reinterpreted in terms of neurobiology, but then a lot of this other stuff is just is kind of irrevocably mystical, and there's nowhere I can go with it.
Yeah, yeah, it goes beyond his wheelhouse for sure.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
because yeah, it gets DMT gets very strange. I'd love to talk to you about, and I'm sure you're probably sick of it, but I have to ask you because I've gone through a few of these experiences myself with the
Mm.
elves or the jesters.
Mm.
Uh, and is this, before we actually continue, is this what Terence McKenna called the self-transforming machine elves? Like, is that a specific archetype, or was he just talking about just the trickster archetype in general? You know, because like self-transforming machine elves is very
Yeah.
specific. You know.
Yeah, I mean, so yes and no. I think
Mm.
whenever you encounter some kind of being, whether it's in real life or whether it's in the DMT space, your brain is going to try and match it to an archetype. It's
Yes.
trying to find a way. How do I respond to this? Is this something I should approach, or is this something I should keep my distance from, right? And it will try and find, it will look at its characteristics, its behavior and stuff and go, okay, this seems like a stranger. I should
Mm.
respond like that. Or this seems more like a motherly being. I should maybe get close to it. Your brain's always trying to do that, and so there is always an archetypal influence. Always, when you meet any kind of being, your brain's always trying
Right.
to find something. How do I respond to this?
Well, that's what makes
And they,
humans humans in a sense, right?
that's what makes
We
humans
can't
human, right?
not not do that. Yeah.
We can't not,
Yeah.
exactly. And so but that doesn't mean the archetypes are the source of it. They're not. It's simply it's the kind of prepackaged, as we said, ways of that your brain uses to try and categorize a being and then decide how, on that basis, how you respond to it, how you react to it, how you behave in its presence.
Mm.
So when Terence McKenna spoke of machine elves, they do have these. They tend to be kind of mischievous and a little bit trickstery, one could say. So people say, "Oh, this is just the trickster archetype," or whatever. But no, I don't think that's true at all. I think yes, there may be that's activating that particular archetypal pattern, so you kind of know how to respond to this being. But it transcends the human. It's a small being that is neither human nor animal, that is that seems to vary in form depending on,
Mm.
they're kind of unified by their character, but they come in various forms. But generally, they are small, lively, giggly, multitudinous. They operate in great numbers, and they are keen to have a wild time, and they want to show you things. And it's like a party with the
Yes.
machine elves or the elves or the
Mischievous.
imps or whatever. Yeah, mischievous. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you find that learning, like, okay, because you're saying these things kind of transcend archetypes and stuff, but
Mm.
could you learn about them by, like, for example, the tricks archetype, could you learn how to interact with them or maybe their nature by studying that archetype in terms of like the jester and what it means and that kind of stuff? Or is it
Um,
like just a whole different playing game and we're just trying to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that the because there's the trickster archetype, and again, there's often overlaps between these archetypes. People talk about the trickster archetype and the jester archetype and the clown archetype, and
Yes.
depending on people kind of um, parse parcelate them in different ways and divide them up. And so you're always, when you think about the archetype, you're always thinking it's a completely human way of thinking about things. It's your brain's way of categorizing beings in terms of human social interactions. That's the best it can do. It's like, how am I going to deal with this thing? Well, it seems kind of tricksterish. I need to be a little bit careful around this because it might turn on me, and I can't necessarily trust what it's telling me. And these are all probably adaptive and sensible responses that your brain is making when confronted by these beings. But I think you have to really kind of abandon that, I would say, because you're dealing with something that it's not another human, it's not an animal. So these kind of quick and dirty responses are likely to fail ultimately because you're not dealing with another human. So it's like, how do you interact with these beings? And I think, again, it comes back to the idea of humility and accepting that we don't know. I don't know what these beings are. All I know is that going back thousands of years, people have been interacting with similar beings. It's not a Terence McKenna-ism entirely. He can't be blamed. I mean, he named them. He gave them that cool name, machine elves. But
Oh, he
people
nailed it with the name for sure.
Oh, he nailed it with the name for sure. I mean, they're by far the most famous residents of these strange realms. But going back to the first study in the 1950s, people described seeing lots of small beings.
Exactly.
And then you look at indigenous tribes that have used DMT containing plants for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They form an integral part of their entire cosmology. They call these
Yeah.
beings Hekura, or the Yanomami specifically. This large indigenous group in South America call them the Hekura, and they describe them in the same terms as being multitudinous. You can never get to the end of them, and that they're singing and dancing and brightly colored, and that's exactly how Terence McKenna was describing these beings, and how many other people, countless other people,
Right.
described these beings in the centuries that followed. So I think we're dealing with something deeper and more fundamental when it comes to these little beings.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. It goes back much further than a lot of us may think. And because I've heard that before of it was ever since Terrence started talking about these elves, then that influenced people to have all these elvish experiences. And maybe that's true to a certain degree, but yeah, like you said, these creatures, entities, whatever you want to call them, go back way further, you know?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, have you encountered any of these elves, trickster beings before?
I have indeed, yes, yes.
How was that? Do you want to walk us through
And
your first experience with that?
well, my first experience was, so we're going back more than 20 years now. I mean, my very first experience with DMT, I didn't see any beings
Yeah.
whatsoever. But I was just confronted by obvious, undeniable alien intelligence that shocked and appalled me and horrified me and left me shaking. And but there
Yeah.
was no beings themselves. But later on, I started to see beings. And how would I describe the elves? I, they weren't like dressed in green uniforms. It weren't like, Gaelic kind of elf beings, like on a Guinness can or something. Do they have elves on Guinness cans? I don't know, but
Little
you get the idea.
leprechauns,
It
like a
wasn't like
finger.
a Hallmark cards, it wasn't quite like that. But the sense of, for me, it's the sense of, I can hear them now, a very, very, very large number, almost like thousands and thousands, like twittering, like really high pitched, and
Mm.
just absolutely everywhere. Like the place was absolutely crawling with these beings, just vast numbers of them, and there was a very strong sense of, how can I describe it? Duplicity, in that they seemed jovial, and yet you could sense that they were they could turn on you if they
Yeah,
wanted to.
yeah,
It was
yeah. Not the purest intentions necessarily.
exactly.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have to be a little
It's
bit
like I
careful
I
around.
recognize that cheeky smile. It's like you're laughing on the outside, but I know that energy behind that. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think the whole DMT experience has that mischievous grin about
Interesting.
it.
The circus
Uh,
archetype, I think that's what Terence called it.
Terence McCourt,
Well,
yeah, he said
he
the
said
archetype
he
of
said
DMT is the
something
circus.
like that, like DMT, like the archetype of DMT is the circus. I could
The
be
archetype of
mis
DMT is the circus,
yeah.
yeah, and he was talking
I could have
about.
misheard that, but something along those lines, which
No,
I'd agree.
I think you quoted it exactly. The archetype of DMT is the circus, and I think he was talking about. I think he had a more of a kind of Victorian circus in his mind, something a little bit darker.
Okay,
Not
okay,
not the modern circus, but there was. I
like
think back in the day, circuses were a little bit more sinister as well. There was
right,
something.
like a satanic
um,
carnival sort
Right,
of thing. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Something uncanny about it,
Interesting.
and that's the vibe that I always get with DMT is that yeah, it's carnival light, but it's like I imagine like one of those old merry-go-rounds, Victorian merry-go-rounds at
Yeah,
night, and like the and the
yeah, yeah.
the the puppets with the grinning face. Welcome to the circus. That kind of thing. Yeah.
This is crazy because like it's like you've gone to the same country as I have, and I'm like, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I've been there to that bloody merry-go-round. It's creepy as. Yeah, because I got kind of turned off DMT the first time I did it just because it was so overwhelming, and like the very, very first time it was similar to you in terms of like there wasn't any entities or clear entities per se, more like a hyperspace technological tunnel kind of thing. But it was the second time I did it where I went into that circus,
Mm.
satanic carnival kind of realm with yeah, just a bunch of smiling, mischievous jesters, but it was like it had an evil tinge to it. I was like, ugh,
Yes.
just giving me the finger
Exactly.
and just laughing at
Yeah, that's
saying
quite common.
stupid shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I was like, dude, what is that? And yeah, I just didn't do it again for a few years until doing ayahuasca, which yeah has a bit of a different quality to it. Would you say that because I know ayahuasca is the active ingredient is DMT, but would you say that ayahuasca and let's say smoked free-based DMT get you into similar realms, or is free-based DMT like particularly unique in terms of the experience? Is it just a
Well, I
shortened
think,
ayahuasca, or is it really something that stands on its own?
well, I think from again, the number of possible answers depending on your perspective. I will talk from a purely pharmacological perspective. We know from studies where they drew the blood of people under the influence of ayahuasca and measured the levels of DMT, because DMT, as you said, is the active component or
Right. Wait, did you say
the
they took
major
blood while
active.
they were tripping on ayahuasca?
Yeah,
Wow, that's
yeah,
brave
yeah,
to be a.
yeah.
Okay.
It's brave, right?
Sorry, I just
And
imagine
so
like you're in the middle of this like intense trip and you just feel like a prick.
I
Someone
guess they
just
use
taking your
like
blood.
a cannula,
Yeah?
so they can just take a sample.
Okay.
Yeah, I imagine. I don't know exactly how they did it, but anyway, they actually measured the levels of blood levels of DMT over time, and of course they rose slowly and then reached a peak,
Okay.
and then started to decline. But the level of DMT only reached, I think, it's like 15 to 20% of what you get with smoked DMT.
Really?
Yeah, so DMT, if you smoke it, it's very fast, but it's like a roller coaster, and you reach a much deeper and higher level very, very rapidly. So ayahuasca generally, I mean, of course, it depends on the brew and how it's prepared and how strong it is, but generally, ayahuasca, it's going to be you're kind of eased into the space, and you sit your brain level DMT levels sit at a much lower level for longer, whereas with smoked or injected you're kind of you hurtle past that and you're into
Yeah. There's
much deeper territory very, very quickly.
more oomph to it.
More umph. Yeah.
Interesting. Would you say, what about this research with, is it DMTX, the extended DMT state? How's
Yes.
how's that going and how like what is I don't know, I guess what's the purpose of making an extended DMT state and what are they doing with this research? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, so well, I think the problem with DMT is, as you mentioned, is that it's a very short acting
Right.
experience. You're fired into this space. You look around kind of wide-eyed, bewildered, shocked, astonished, appalled, awestruck, all of these things for a couple of minutes. And by the time you've got your bearings, so to speak, oriented yourself within this space, you're already on your way out. So it's kind of, it's
Mm,
like a roller coaster. You never get the
yeah.
chance to really engage with the space very much. You can't establish communication with the beings really. You can't analyze the space, which is kind of what I think we should be doing. I think we should be analyzing the space much more carefully and trying to establish more stable two-way communication with the intelligences within the space to try and work out what the fuck this thing is.
Mm,
But you can't do that with just injected DMT because it's too fast. Ayahuasca, people always say, well, what about ayahuasca? That's an extended DMT experience. Yes, it is. But again, you're still at the mercy of pharmacokinetics. So it still rises in the bloodstream
mm,
and it stabilizes very briefly and then it starts to come down. So you never achieve this kind of stable brain concentration of DMT. And there's also lots of negative, well, not necessarily negative, but generally unpleasant side effects, such as, vomiting and
yeah, yeah.
that kind of thing, right? It's very uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And there's a lot more alkaloids in the ayahuasca brew, right? So it'd be harder to scientifically study.
That's another issue is that you've got the harmala alkaloids
Hmm.
that are moderately psychoactive at least and certainly color the experience to some extent. So, and again, it's very difficult to reach these kind of brain DMT levels with ayahuasca. So it occurred to me way back now, well, 10 years ago it was when I first had the idea that we can stabilize brain DMT levels by basically repurposing this technology from anesthesiology called target controlled intravenous infusion, which allows you to have a programmed infusion of a drug into a short acting drug into someone's bloodstream and kind of keep the brain levels of the particular drug at a stable level, and they use it in anesthesiology to keep someone in an anesthetized state. That's
All
this
right.
technique that's been kind of the mainstay of anesthesiology for decades now. You don't just inject someone with an anesthetic and then hope it doesn't wear off. You have to use a very
Um,
short-acting anesthetic. Then you have an infusion machine that delivers a precisely regulated dose per minute of the drug, and they kind of bring your brain levels, the anesthetic to a level and keep it fairly stable over whether it's an hour or 5 hours or whatever of the surgical procedure. So it's a very cool way of
oh,
working.
interesting.
Um,
I wonder who
and
came up with the idea
remarkably,
of that. Like, oh, we should use this technology for DMT.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it was. I don't know whether it goes back to the 80s or maybe before, but now it's kind of standard. I mean, that's how
Yeah.
you do it. Um, and it occurred to me as I was researching DMT was that, well, all of the kind of requisite pharmacological properties that these anesthetic drugs need to have in order to be used in this kind of this technique. They need to be short acting. They can't
Mm.
build up in the bloodstream. They need to be rapidly metabolized. They shouldn't have toxic metabolites. They shouldn't exhibit tolerance. All of these things DMT possesses. So it seems like it's almost like DMT was almost like it was designed for that purpose. So I initially wrote to Rick Strassman and I said to him, look, I need your blood data that you took from your subjects in your 1990 studies because I want to construct this mathematical model, this pharmacokinetic model of DMT, and basically show that you could use this target controlled intravenous infusion technology with DMT. And so we kind of started
Wow.
working together on that. We called it extended state DMT initially, but then somewhere along the line that got shortened to DMTX,
Okay.
and the rest is history. And now it's being implemented in humans, has been implemented in humans in at least two groups so far, academic
Wow.
groups in Imperial College London and a
Yeah.
group in Basel, Switzerland as well. And
Brave
it's safe.
people. I gotta say,
Yes,
because that's
yes,
even just normal
yeah. I mean, these
DMT.
were
I'm like,
experienced
I'm good.
ex experienced psychonauts that kind of volunteered for this stuff. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't overly overwhelming, and there are no kind of physiological or cardiovascular or respiratory
Okay. Okay.
problems. It's like
No, no
safe,
freakouts.
tolerable.
Nothing. Nothing too crazy.
No.
And what
So
have
yeah.
the results been like? Like, have people been coming back from these extended state experiences and able to bring back more from these, originally very short lasting experiences?
Well, that's kind of what we are hoping for eventually, is that this study at Imperial College that I spoke of was the first. It was a
Mm.
pilot study. It was just kind of to show that it was safe and tolerable, and it was only half a dozen, or sorry, about a dozen subjects underwent the experience, and so there wasn't any kind of plan to formally analyze the space or to establish communication with the entities. So, but still, even from that, we got some really cool trip reports from the people. The first person to do it was a guy called who I work with, Professor Carl Smith, who's a very experienced psychonaut, and he did DMTX over 5 sessions, 5 different occasions, and he was interacting with the same kind of beings every time.
Okay.
And eventually, it got to the point where they were recognizing him, and kind of he sensed that they were asking him, what are you, you're back again, kind of thing. It's like, not you again, as if like, what are you going back for so long, every time, and it's interesting because during Rick Strassman's study
Mm.
back in the 1990s, one of his subjects, a woman called Sarah, she she encountered a being that said to her how wonderful it was that they had discovered this technology and that they had a lot to teach us once we learn how to make more extended contact.
Wow.
So it's almost like, oh, maybe that was what they were talking about. Maybe they were thinking, these entities were thinking about the technologies that we're developing now in the form of DMTX. And well, that's just the way, the way that I imagine it. Maybe it's a little bit, I'm a little bit
Yeah, I like
biased.
to I like to imagine that too. I'm like, yeah, cool, that's cool. Yeah, that's pretty wild that one of these entities said that to one of these participants in that OG study. So, and here
Yeah,
we
yeah,
are
yeah,
with an extended
yeah.
DMT version. Wow.
Yeah, and there was a another guy called Anton Bilton. He funded it. He
Mm.
funded the DMTX study, and when he enters the DMT space, he always encounters these small elfish beings. He calls them the gingerbread men, who I guess I don't know why, but I guess they're reminiscent of gingerbread men. I've never seen them, but anyway. And when he was in the space, they surrounded him like a family of them. It seemed like a family of them, and the little younger gingerbread men, I guess the children, were kind of looking at him a little bit puzzled and a little bit concerned. And he said they were checking the back of his neck. So they always check the back of my neck. And he got the impression that they were checking if there was a cord attached. So they weren't
Oh,
sure whether they were kind of checking whether he'd kind of passed permanently to their side or whether he was just visiting.
oh, checking for the plug. Very matrixy.
Yeah, whether he was still plugged in, basically, kind of like Matrix kind of thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then once they were kind of satisfied that he was still alive, they started showing him. He describes it as like a jewel encrusted box or a pad that contained these glowing sections and knobs and sliders and all this kind of like a technological device,
Mm.
as if to say, look, this is how you work it, whatever it is. This is how, something like this. And this kind of experience is also very common. Timothy Leary, in his second experience back in the 1960s, encountered a being with this jewel encrusted pad that was showing him, as if, technological device of some sort. And then one of Strassman's subjects, a guy called Spiros, Dmitri, in the book, he described his whole field of vision was covered by this reality synthesizer, he described it as, which was again this technological device with knobs and sliders and buttons and things flashing and
Mm.
popping and pinging, and he couldn't make sense of it. So it's just kind of uncanny that you get these recurring things, like they're doing their best with this very primitive hominid brain, to try and communicate something, and they're not quite sure exactly how much we can understand and how much we can make sense of. And clearly we're quite limited. But you can imagine sending in a mathematician or a linguist into these realms who can spend 30 minutes or an hour interacting with these beings who might be able to work out what the language is, how the language is constructed, or what
Yeah.
these devices might be doing, and mapping the topological and geometric structure of the space. So that's really going back to your original question: is why I kind of thought of DMTX in the first place was so that we could spend more time within the space and do experiments within the space and interact with these beings for a longer period of time.
Yeah. That's awesome because I feel like a lot of the psychedelic studies, which is great that they're used for medicine, treating addiction, PTSD, and all that kind of stuff, but I feel like many lose the kind of point of psychedelics, which it's not just a medicine per se. It's like I think something that you say is DMT is a technology, not a drug, which I
Mm,
really like
mm.
that saying because I agree with. Can you, for those who aren't familiar with your work, can you like expand on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, the technology, well, a drug, first of all, is any molecule really that interacts with our physiology and alters our physiology in some
Yeah,
way. And there are
exactly.
many psychedelic drugs which do manipulate our neurochemistry and they alter the structure and dynamics of our world. But if we think of if we accept the possibility that DMT is allowing us to interface with some kind of discarnate intelligence, some kind of intelligent agent, then does that sound more like a drug, or does it sound more like some kind of a communication technology that goes into our brain and opens that channel of communication that allows that interface to form? To me, that sounds more like a technology than just a drug. I think a drug is kind of underselling DMT quite a lot. But also, once you adopt the mindset of it being a technology, then you think, well, how do we develop and learn to use it? It's no longer just a drug that we take, but it's a technology that we learn to use and we develop. And I think DMTX is kind of the current culmination of treating DMT like a technology. Smoking it or standard injections kind of, I don't think, represent the optimal way to use this technology. And I think we're still learning 75 years after DMT was first isolated or first
Wow,
synthesized and
that's
and used in
wild.
a human,
Yeah.
in a pure form at least. We're still learning, what's the best way to use this technology as I see it, and DMTX is part of that. It's kind of the next iteration of our quest to understand this molecule and understand the realms to which it grants us access.
Mm. Do you think we're kind of going, or do you think this is leading to a opening of Pandora's box? And then once we kind of open into this new era, there's no turning back? If this is like, let's say, alien technology or whatever the hell they're trying to communicate to us,
Yeah,
where do you think this is leading?
I mean, on an individual level, every time someone smokes DMT, certainly for the first time, it
Yeah.
very much is opening Pandora's box, so someone's box anyway. And
Someone's
but
box is definitely
yeah,
getting opened. Yeah.
something's getting open, and yeah, I mean, what it means, collectively as a species, I think we're far from, most people just dismiss it. And
Oh, yeah,
it's
for
easier
sure.
just to say, this is hallucination, nothing to see here, folks. And is that partly a defense mechanism against the immensity of the implications of actually taking DMT seriously? And I think that's
Yeah.
a lot of it is that people simply they have a very fixed idea of what is and it isn't possible.
Mm.
Going back to the idea of kind of a human hubris in thinking that we've got it all worked out. I think, yes, I mean, to call it Pandora's box is the understatement of the millennium, I think. I think it's hard for me to even see beyond. It's such, it's like trying to peer into a black hole in a way. It's like, how do we, what does humanity and life look like in a world where we are regularly spending time within, within a space that is occupied by non-human intelligences. It's a daily thing. People
Yeah.
might, whether they go into a pod and be injected with DMT for a few hours or a few days or a few weeks,
Mm.
little expeditions into the DMT space and interacting with these beings and then coming back. And that sounds almost science fiction, and yet the technology basically to do that is already here. We could put someone into the DMT space for at least several hours.
Wow.
Um,
That's
why not several
yeah, I know.
days? Yeah,
I
so
love that people can like, you can kind of train yourself to the point where you can do that. But yeah, it's like a few hour DMT. Still, my body has a reaction like, oh man, that's
oh, me
sounds
too.
so intense. That's no way.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm glad that
yeah,
other
me
people are
too.
brave enough to try that. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
I still need to get
yeah.
a few more trainings done, I guess. But it's crazy, man. Like, I'd love to ask you
Mm.
what's like the latest research or I guess consensus on endogenous DMT? Like, why is it scattered throughout nature, or what are the current theories, and where are we at on endogenous DMT? Because I know that when Rick Strassman wrote his book, we weren't. It was a hypothesis at that point, right? Where
Mm.
the human body produced DMT, and I think now that's been proven. But you're the scientist, so you tell me.
Yeah, so we've known since the 1950s that DMT is at least it's found in human bodily fluids. It's found in urine, it's found in blood, it's found in
Yes.
cerebrospinal fluid. So we know that the body is making DMT. What we don't know is um, why it's making DMT. What's its function?
Yes.
That is a mystery. Although we have some clues now. So
Okay.
Rick Strassman, in his 90s study, in his book, DMT, the Spirit Molecule, he hypothesized, and it was purely a hypothesis, that DMT is released at the point of death, and that it kind of acts as the conduit through which we enter the afterlife, if you like. It's the
Mm.
portal that allows us to pass through our consciousness, to pass from earthly consciousness into the great beyond. But it was a hypothesis, and it's often repeated as if it's a fact. But there's no evidence in humans, at least, that that's the case. However, what is very interesting is the research that's been conducted after Rick Strassman's book. So there are a number of studies now showing that DMT, first of all, it, as well as being endogenous, it binds to a receptor known as the sigma 1 receptor,
Hmm.
which was originally called an orphan receptor. Poor thing, right? An orphan receptor is a receptor in the body that doesn't have a known natural molecule that binds to it, what's called a ligand.
Okay.
So it's kind of receptor that never gets tickled, basically. Yeah.
The
But
kid that's left out of the
century,
party. Yeah.
earlier in this century, people discovered that DMT actually does tickle this receptor. It binds to the sigma 1 receptor and activates it. So suggesting that endogenous DMT's function might be to bind to this sigma 1 receptor. Okay, that's interesting.
Mm.
So what does this sigma 1 receptor do? Well, subsequent studies showed that if you take some neuronal cells, neurons, brain cells, and culture them, and you starve them of oxygen, like would happen if you have a stroke or something like this, or your heart stops, then the neurons die, and quite quickly. This is why strokes are so devastating. And
Yeah.
if the oxygen supply to your brain is cut off, then your brain is damaged irreversibly very, very quickly.
Yeah.
So, but what they found is that if they added some DMT to this neuronal culture, it actually the neuronal cells, these brain cells, survived for much longer, and that this was dependent upon the DMT binding to this sigma 1 receptor. So what does this tell us? Well, it suggests perhaps that during the dying process, as your cardiovascular respiratory system start to collapse and your brain becomes starved of oxygen, this is precisely the time when your brain, should you come back, let's say you're resuscitated or you recover spontaneously, if you want to protect the brain, then you need to, this is kind of needs to be an absolute focus because the brain is very, very sensitive to being deprived of oxygen. So you need to protect the brain during this period when it's being deprived of oxygen. And then this would be exactly the time when you want to flood the brain with DMT, which would help to protect the neurons. So this is kind of uncanny. It suggests, well, maybe then when you, as you are dying, the brain is flooded with DMT, and this is kind of the body's last ditch attempt to kind of save the brain, just in case you come back, by preserving these neuronal cells in this oxygen deprived environment. And some recent studies have also shown that in rats, if you induce cardiac arrest, if you stop the hearts of rats, their brain floods with DMT. Very briefly, you get this spike in DMT. So it's more and more looking like Rick Strassman might have been onto something when he said that DMT is released during the dying process. So DMT could
through
be
the pineal gland, right? Like, is that still
no?
No.
That's the part that he probably got wrong, because the pineal gland it's about this size, the end of my little finger, and it produces melatonin in nanogram, microgram quantities. It's not set up.
Gotcha.
It's not big enough, basically, to be pumping out milligrams and milligrams of DMT, which is what would be necessary here. So it's probably, brain cells more generally probably can produce DMT. And in fact, in this rat study I was describing, they did actually remove the pineal gland from the rats. They were testing this idea, removed the pineal gland, and then did the experiment again, and the DMT levels were exactly the same.
Really?
So it's probably not coming from the pineal gland. We can forget about the pineal.
When was this study made?
This study that I'm describing was, I think, 2023. I could be wrong.
Okay.
Might have been a bit before, but it's the last few years.
Pretty recent. Okay.
Yeah, pretty recent stuff.
And that's pretty much like conclusively debunked the pineal gland DMT hypothesis.
There's some people that still hang on to it. It was a small number of rats, and so maybe it was just poorly powered statistically, this kind of thing. But through rational analysis of the pineal gland's abilities and also this rat study, it suggests probably the pineal's not involved. There's no reason why the pineal would be involved. It's because of that mystical link to the pineal gland and the third eye that people are kind of desperate to find a biological basis for, that they refused to let the pineal go. But I don't think there's anything there, to be honest.
Well, good to know. I wasn't aware of that 2023 study. So that, I mean, like if you remove the pineal gland and they're still producing DMT, it would seem most likely that, well, you don't need it, I guess, to produce.
You don't need it. I mean, the pineal might be producing DMT, but I don't think there's any reason to think it's solely responsible. That you need to be decalcifying your pineal gland and stuff like this, in order to, in order to restore DMT production and that kind of thing.
Okay. Maybe it was a conspiracy. That's why they decalcified our pineal gland, so we don't produce DMT anymore.
That's what people
I'm sure
say.
That's a theory, right?
That's it.
So, like, I'm curious, how do you respond to, let's say, skeptics who say, this is poppycock, this is just hallucinations, you guys are fucking out of your minds? Like, how would you like speak to a skeptical minded person or a materialist and try to kind of build a bridge for them to understand like where you're coming from?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, poppycock is tame compared to what I get, but yeah, I'll go with poppycock. Can I handle?
I was trying to be, I was trying to be nice and British.
Balderdash.
Poppycock, yes.
I mean, that's what I have to wrestle with, and that's why I don't jump to. I'm talking about things that sound far out now. An intelligent agent that interfaces with the human brain. I mean, that just sounds like wild. But you have to realize that I didn't just leap to that and that that there's a deep foundation of work from the ground up, looking at the neurobiology, looking at how the brain has evolved to construct our world model, looking at the kinds of worlds our brain can and cannot construct, looking at hallucinations in other conditions, in psychosis and other neuropsychological conditions, and comparing it, looking at the content and structure of dreams and all this stuff. I basically, most of my work is actually taking these alternate explanations, more orthodox explanations, like it's just a hallucination, just your brain. It's a wild cortical fabrication. It's your brain making it up. I take those explanations and I say, okay, let's test them. Let's work through this. Let's analyze them. Does this make sense? Can we use this as an explanation for the DMT state? And that's what I do in Death by Astonishment, my new book, is I go through carefully all of these alternate explanations. And it's only when I've ruled them out, eliminated them, and say, no, they don't explain this state, that's when I have that final 10% of my work where I can say, okay, these explanations have failed. What could be an explanation? What are the characteristics of the DMT state and the characteristics of how the DMT manipulates our brain? Does that give us any clues about what is actually going on? And I think that's when I start speculating and going, okay, now we need to start thinking about the brain getting access to some alternate source of information, first of all. What does that information look like? Where does that information come from? How does it gain access? How does it gain access to the brain? And eventually you reach the point, after a long time, you reach the point where I have now, where I generally lean strongly towards the position that we can only explain the DMT state if the brain is accessing, or the brain is given access to some kind of intelligent agent, which is directing the brain. I call the DMT world a directed world, in that it's not sensed. You don't sense the DMT world in the same way that you sense the environment, but actually the world, your brain is being manipulated by this intelligent agent. So as I said before, it seizes control. It commandeers your world-building machinery of your brain, and it uses your brain to construct its world. So that's how I deal with skeptics, is to actually, because they always have the same response. It's hallucination. It's type of exotic dream imagery. It's archetypes. And I have to be able to,
whatever that means.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the worst one. Oh, it's just your brain on drugs, man. I don't need to deal with that. That's not worth. There's nothing there. But when people come with hallucinations, though, I have to be able to deal with it.
Chemicals, That always made me laugh.
What's that?
It always makes me laugh when people say, like, "Oh, it's just chemicals." Like they say the word.
Oh, it's just
like, it's
chemicals.
Just.
Yeah.
Dude, chemicals is freaking magic. Like, you could argue that, it's fucking spectacular. What do you mean just? Like, oh, it's just.
Yeah.
Like, what are some misconceptions you would say, or common misconceptions that skeptics will argue? Like, for example, it's just a hallucination, and how would you counterpoint that?
Well, I think it's a difficult one to answer. I think most scientists who I deal with probably couldn't even define a hallucination. If I ask them what is a hallucination and how does it differ from a real perception, they probably have to think quite carefully. Yes. So often they apply the term hallucination without really understanding what hallucination is. What is a hallucination? It's made of the same stuff as a normal perception. All perceptions are constructed as patterns of neural activity. A hallucination is the same.
Right.
The difference is that a hallucination
is a kind of a controlled hallucination, right?
A kind of, that's what Anil Seth calls it. I don't really like that term because reality, a hallucination has a specific definition, in that a hallucination is this perception that isn't properly mapped to sensory inputs. So it's not adaptively mapped to sensory inputs. Whereas a real perception, as we would call it, it's still built from neural activity, but it has this relationship to the environment that seems to be functional and seems to be adaptive, that allows us to interact with the environment in adaptive and functional and positive and beneficial ways. Whereas a hallucination is like a perception, a pattern. It's a pattern of neural activity or an object model that's incorporated into the broader world model that isn't properly mapped to the normal waking, that isn't properly mapped to the environment. And so when you think about it like that, then you see that, well, dreams are also built from the same stuff. It's just your brain constructing a world in the absence of sensory inputs from the environment. Hallucinations, yeah, from psychotics or whatever, it's just their brain incorporating object models that aren't properly mapped to the environment. So what's DMT? Well, that's also a completely different world model that's being represented in the brain. And then the question becomes, well, is that alternate world model, this DMT world, is it like the normal waking world? Is it being mapped to sensory inputs, some kind of alternate sensory input? Is there, when you're interacting with a being, of course, let's say a machine elf, the machine elf that you're experiencing is this model constructed by your brain. The question then is that model being tested against, being mapped against some being that exists out there, in the same way that as I'm speaking to you now, even if we were in the same room, the Tom would be this model in my brain, and yet I have good reason to believe that there's actually some conscious being that's existing outside. I can't prove that, but I'm going to assume that that's the case, unless this is AI. But so that's the kind of the question.
So it's like when you go through these experiences, like you're getting, like, sensory input has to come from somewhere, right? Is that kind of what you're saying? Like, what you're experiencing in perception, like, it has to come from somewhere. It's not just self-generated.
Well, yes. So that's the question, is when you dream, your brain is generating perceptions. It's generating a world in the absence of sensory inputs, but generally it draws upon, it's a selective simulation of the normal waking world. So people dream about dogs and cats and humans, and it's kind of very similar to the normal waking world most of the time. So your brain can do it in the absence of sensory inputs.
Okay.
But in my opinion, what it shouldn't be able to do is construct far more complex worlds that don't have any relationship to the world that your brain evolved and learned to construct. That's the mystery, which suggests to me that there is indeed, when I see a machine elf, that doesn't mean that there's a machine elf that has that form. It just means that my brain is modeling some intelligent being that exists and that is being mapped in some way to that model. Some being exists outside of my brain, and it's directing information into my brain, and my brain is constructing a model of that being. So there is some kind of relationship. There is some intelligence out there. That's my definition of the kind of the reality, if you like, of the DMT world. I don't think you're going anywhere. You don't go to another world. You're not crossing the trans-dimensional divide or something. You don't need to do that. All that needs to happen is it's like switching the channel on a TV set in a way. The TV doesn't go anywhere. It just starts picking up information from some other source.
Exactly. Like, the signal is always there. You just got to attune your perception to receive that frequency, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. What do you think? Where do you think this is going? Like, is a lot of research kind of going towards this in terms of, like, let's say, mapping out hyperspace or whatever, or do you think it's going to go more towards, like, medicine and healing depression?
I think both. I mean, there is more work being done now on DMT's use in psychotherapeutics because it's so short acting, and particularly with DMTX because you can control the dosage level. It could be very useful in psychotherapeutics, but that's never been my particular interest, of course. I'm very much interested in the space itself and the intelligences within the space. I think they need to be studied. Whatever you think about their ontology, whether you think they are real or not, that's irrelevant in my opinion. This is an incredibly strange and bizarre state of consciousness, and it should be studied. And unfortunately, it's very difficult, I imagine, if you're working for a university and trying to get funding because you want to speak to aliens. So there isn't that much work.
Yeah.
However, I work for I'm on the board of directors of a non-profit called New Nautics,
Okay.
Noonautics. People can go to newnautics.org and learn about our work. And we actually have a license with a government in the Caribbean, in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which will allow us, we're setting up a retreat stroke research center in St. Vincent, called Eleusis, Eleusis, Eleusis. So people can go to eleusis.mind.com and find out more about the retreat center itself. And we will be able to bring both research subjects as well as members of the public, anyone who wants to experience DMTX in a beautiful, perfect setting, not like a hospital room, but in a
Yeah.
beautiful, with all of the preparation and integration, the setting all just perfectly managed, and actually come and experience DMTX. And we'll also be doing research there as well. And so actually being able to send in specialists, from different fields, whether it's mathematicians or linguists or theologians or artists, or whatever, and send them into the DMT space for much longer periods of time, and actually do these kind of studies where we do take seriously the content and the structure and the intelligences within the space and try to work out, what the hell is going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to be a part of that one day. Check it out.
Sure.
Maybe not me take the MTX quite yet, but I can witness from the outside. Oh, I guess you can't really. You got to be inside to witness it. But I'll have to, yeah, psych myself up because that sounds like intense, but so interesting, And I love that you guys are doing this and exploring this new frontier. I suppose it's like for the longest time in human history, we'll on ships and exploring different parts of Earth that we haven't discovered before. Now we've pretty much. I'm sure there's some undiscovered places on Earth, of course, and the ocean as well. But
The
I feel
oceans,
like the
yeah.
cosmos is like the new frontier.
Yeah, I think we've been focused too much on kind of an outwards trajectory
Mm.
into space around us, but actually there's a lot more space inwards.
Yeah.
There's a lot more room going down to the lower levels than there is, out there. It looks bigger, but actually the scale from kind of molecular down to the quantum is many orders of magnitude larger than the size of a molecule versus the size of the observable universe or something like this. There's a lot more space
Oh
at the
yeah,
bottom. I think
absolutely.
that's the direction we should be going in, focus inwards and inner paths to outer space. Rick Strassman's second book. I think that's what we should be focusing on now because we have access to it and we can go very, very deep. Whereas it takes a lot of energy and ingenuity and engineering to get even to the nearest fucking moon.
Yeah,
So the idea of
exactly.
exploring the galaxy is a long way off.
Yeah, because when you go through these breakthrough experiences, you really go. It feels like a bottomless pit, you know, and you just realize how truly infinite. Because we have a concept of infinity, but once you
Mm,
like experience just a slither of what infinity is, it's actually quite well, death by astonishment. That's why it's a perfect title for your new book because that's exactly
exactly,
how it
yes.
feels like. So yeah, dude, I really appreciate you coming on. Like, I could talk to you for hours, and I'd love to continue down different paths. But you've been very kind with your time. And what's next for your journey? How's the book release been going, and what's next on the agenda?
Yeah, so Death by Astonishment. So that's just literally just published this month. You're watching on video, there it is. Death by Confronting the Mystery of the World's Strangest Drug. So this is really my culmination of my thinking over the last 20 years, as I said, and as well as looking at the history of DMT going back millennia. So kind of, I guess I was trying with the book to kind of directed at two different types of people. Both people who are entirely new to DMT and know nothing about it,
Hmm.
so they can learn about what an incredible, remarkable molecule this is, but also people who do know about DMT and might have come to certain conclusions about what it is or what it isn't. And there are a lot of skeptics, as you said, who think they've got a handle on what DMT is. And I think I wanted to actually convince people that actually it's a great struggle to explain DMT and its effects on consciousness. So I've said everything I can, I think, but up until this point about DMT in Death by Astonishment. So I'm probably going to sit back a little bit
Mm.
now. I'll talk about it a lot on podcasts and things, but aside from that, in terms of my writing, I left academia about 3 years ago, so I'm not, apart from my work with this group, New Nautics in the
Okay.
US.
Yeah.
I'm basically a writer now, so I will start writing a new book that will not be about DMT.
Of course. No, it's awesome, man. I think you're doing amazing work, and I think it's important to study these things, and especially drugs. 'Cause you know, I'm sure more than anyone about the stigma that people have, and it's inconsistent stigma because you down a bottle of whiskey while saying
Yeah.
drugs is bad, okay? And it's like, nah, man.
Yeah, that's
Exactly.
changing now, I think, fortunately.
Yeah, it is. It is. I saw a South Park
People start to
episode.
see that psychedelics are a little bit different and they're
Exactly.
not the same as crack or something. But actually, it could be very useful and could have potentially be revolutionary treatments, I think, for various very difficult to treat neuropsychological conditions. So I think you're going to see a lot more about psychedelics in the coming years and a lot more about DMT, I think, as well.
Oh, for sure. You know, because I was just I recently saw this South Park episode where I don't know, this couple were drinking at a restaurant and they were just like sculling wine. I'm like, oh yeah, this guy, my friend, is just wasting his life on smoking pot every day, and he's just like, it just made me laugh. Uh, yeah, man. But I guess actually before we end, if you don't mind,
Yeah.
can we? I want to ask you, what is the biggest misconception about DMT? Not from the skeptic side, but from the
Mm.
psychonaut perspective. Like, what is something that mainly gets accepted as fact, or people that say that isn't quite true?
Well, I mean, we touched on one of them, the big one. Well, not necessarily misconception. We talked about the pineal gland is a huge one,
Yes,
and
good one.
the fact that it's released at death. But that might well be true, as we've just spoken about. That DMT is released during dreaming. That's a big one. The idea that dreams are caused by DMT release. This is an old idea. It goes back to the 1980s, a
Okay,
hypothesis in the 1980s
I
by,
used to think that.
yeah, of course. A
Yeah.
lot of people did. A lot of people did. So don't feel too bad about it. But yeah, it was just an idea. Biochemist called Jace Calloway had this hypothesis that maybe dreams were caused by DMT. But as anyone who's smoked DMT knows, that dreaming and DMT are not the same thing at all. I mean, completely to say that people expect, if you've never taken DMT and you think you're just going to have a dream,
Yeah, nah.
you're going to be no.
Maybe like level one mushroom dose. I would be like, oh, it's quite dreamy. I could
Yeah.
see for sure, but
Yes.
not a breakthrough
Yeah.
DMT dose. That's just
Not a breakthrough
there's
DMT.
no
No.
language for that yet. I don't think.
There's no language for it. Yeah. Unenglishable, as Terence McKenna would
Yes,
say.
unenglishable.
Yes.
Exactly. And it's poppycock to try and put a word to it right now
That's it.
until we find
Yeah.
one.
Yeah.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate you coming on again. And
You're welcome.